Are you too busy? Too stressed out? Unhealthy? Then this is the place for you. Welcome to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals, where we help you create wellness and balance with a holistic approach that will work for you, even with the busiest of schedules, so you can live the life you want. And now, here's your host, Diane Randall.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Diane Randall. Welcome to the show that teaches the best inner tools and strategies to help you create the life you want. I want to thank you for listening. And if you are new to the show, welcome. It's so exciting to have you here listening. Today's episode is going to be about emotional eating. I'm so excited to talk to my guest today because our emotional connection to food starts at birth. We develop some powerful emotional connections to eating and food. In our food-driven culture, eating is a readily accessible way to add pleasure to our lives, and it helps us to cope with the sadness and all the things that aren't going right in our lives. And that's why I am so excited to have my guest here today, because we eat to socialize, nurture, express love, have fun, soothe a hurt, and we reward ourselves with eating from an emotional perspective. So I teach a workshop, and I'm always talking about how we use food to fill a void that food cannot fill, because we use it to cope with and avoid feelings when we are emotionally triggered in our lives. So if you are someone listening who feels that your emotional connection to food is causing you problems, then you will want to listen to the show until the very end. My guest is here today to talk about emotional eating, and he also has a unique perspective as well as some professional advice. You will learn what emotional eating really means, how to release your emotional triggers to food, and how to bring yourself back into balance, and whatever awesome insight he has to help us to be more present with our eating and just release that emotional attachment that we have with our food. I'm so happy to introduce Dr. Glenn Livingston to the show. He's a veteran psychologist and longtime CEO of a consulting firm that has serviced several Fortune 500 clients in the food industry. Dr. Glenn Livingston is the author of the book, Never Binge Again. He has an interesting perspective to eating as well, not only as a professional expert on the subject, but he actually spent a portion of his life as an obese man in the past. So he has a lot to share with us today. Welcome back, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Well, thank you so much, Diane. What a wonderful introduction. And if I give you my dad's number, would you call him and say all those nice things about me, please?
Yes, I will.
Kind of help me out with my own emotional eating. Would you mind? That was a wonderful introduction. So where would you like to start?
Well, just to get a framework for the topic of emotional eating, can you just give us an example of what that really means?
A lot of things I'm going to tell you today might sound controversial for a psychologist to say, because I think that it's very important to put emotional eating in perspective. So, I'm not, as you heard in my bio, I'm not only a psychologist, but I consulted for industry, including big food companies, for a long time. And I am very familiar with the billions of dollars that go into engineering these food-like substances that are like hyper-palatable concentrations of starch and oil and fat and sugar and excitotoxins that really target the lizard brain and give us a neurological shift in our pleasure systems that evolution didn't prepare us to take. Now, when you put things in your body that evolution didn't really prepare you to digest, what happens is that your nervous system goes to work on isolating the toxins and, parsing the amount of sugar and fat and oil and starch and salt and figuring out what to do with all this stuff. And as a result, your neurological system is no longer able to conduct the emotions at the level it would be if you were, like eating mostly fruits and vegetables or, some lean proteins or something like that. And so there is a physiological numbing of sorts that occurs when we go to what we call comfort food. So you get this phenomenon where people are looking for love at the bottom of these bags and boxes and containers, and trust me, it's not there. I've looked. If it was there, I would tell you there's no love at the bottom of the bag. It's just not.
I think we've all looked. I looked in the past, but like you said, it's this deep connection that's designed by the food industry to keep us tapped in. And
what's important is that they have a life of their own. Once you're involved with those things, because most people are not thinking about broccoli as comfort food. Most people are not binging on spinach. Most people are binging on starch and sugar and, all these things that are created by industry. This like artificially concentrated sources of calories and flavor that we didn't have on the Savannah. There were no chocolate bars on the Savannah. There was no pizza on the Savannah, which is not to say that people can't eat chocolate or, a little pizza or something is a wonderful thing for them. But you have to acknowledge it didn't exist. And so something's happening neurologically when you ingest that wasn't really intended to happen. Now, the particular foods that people gravitate towards can spark some very soulful conversations. And I'll give you an example from my own life. I was always a chocoholic. I mean, I was the kind of guy who had this little voice in my head that said, when chocolate comes from a cocoa bean and cocoa bean comes from a plant, and so chocolate's really a vegetable. And just hand it over and nobody gets hurt, right? But I mean, in all honesty, I was a serious food addict, and chocolate always started my binges. And once I started eating the chocolate, it would be, I could eat 2 pizzas, like not 2 slices, but 2 pizzas, or a box of Munchkins, or 6 bagels, and whatever you can imagine I could eat. I'm 6'4", I'm reasonably muscular. In my youth, if I exercised for 2 or 3 hours a day, I could eat 6,000 calories a day, no problem, and I wouldn't gain weight. Oh my goodness! So I had all these emotional eating patterns, and I did this really large study to figure out where they came from, because I was also a consultant, and I got 40,000 people to come to my website at the time when internet clicks were very cheap over a couple of years, like back in 1999, 2000, something like that. And they took this big survey that told me all about their life, areas of life where they were satisfied, unsatisfied. And it told me all about the foods that they had trouble stopping. Like, what would they turn to for comfort? What did they have trouble stopping when they started? And I found 3 interesting things, but the first of them was about chocolate. And what I found was that people who couldn't stop eating chocolate tended to be lonely or brokenhearted in some way, more so than people that had trouble with other foods. And I thought, well, that makes sense. I was in a bad marriage. I was lonely and brokenhearted. And because I come from a family of 17 psychotherapists and psychologists and psychiatrists, et cetera, I went and I asked my mom if any of this made sense. And I had a really soulful conversation with her. And she said, well, I'm kind of embarrassed, Glenn, but when you were a little boy, when you were like 1.5 years old, you would come crying to me, but I didn't have the wherewithal to hold you all the time. I was scared that they were going to send your dad to Vietnam. He was a captain in the army, and they were sending them overseas at that point. And I didn't know if he'd come back. And my father, your grandfather, was in prison. And I was really depressed about what that meant. And he had been my idol. I had no idea he was doing those things. And I was really depressed. And so I hate to say it, but when you came crying to me for a hug or for some healthy food, I sometimes pointed to a bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup that I kept in a refrigerator on the floor. And I'd say, hey, Glenn, go get your Bosco. And you'd go running over to the chocolate syrup. You put it in your mouth, just put the bottle in your mouth and suck on it. And you'd go into a chocolate sugar coma. And I thought to myself, oh my God, that is where this all comes from. That was the match that struck the fire. And it was a very important conversation for me because I forgave myself. I felt compassionate for what I'd been through, that all this negative self-castigation was very softened after that conversation. It was a very important conversation to have. And I forgave my mom. I got to learn a lot more about what was happening for her, what it was like when my grandfather went to prison, what it was like to be an army wife, how terrified she was. I forgave her. My mom and I were closer after that. But I didn't stop binging on chocolate. And so in the movies, you'd think, well, you see the connection and you have this tearful scene and then, you understand that and then you can stop binging. But that's not what happened. What happened instead was there was a little voice in my head that said, you know what, Glenn? You're right. Your mama didn't love you enough. And she left this great big empty hole inside you, which you're going to have to keep filling with chocolate until you find the love of your life. And I just kept on binging. In fact, it got worse. And I found very similar stories in my clients. For example, people that struggle with salty, crunchy things tended to be very stressed at work. And they had this little voice in their head that would say, you know what? Until we can get the man's boot off of our neck, until we can get our own business and change our life and build our freedom, we're just going to have to keep right on binging on chips and pretzels. And the same thing for people with struggles with soft, chewy, floury things like, bread and bagels and pasta. They were more stressed at home. And their inner voice would say, until we can fix our husband, or until we can fix our kids, until we get rid of all this stress, we're just going to have to keep right on binging at home.
So what do you say to all those people who like the chocolate like you did, the crunchy things? What do you say to people who don't get the connection that some of their triggers have come from childhood? How do you help someone that literally has no clue as to what that connection is?
Well, first of all, the good news is that with regards to stopping the behavior, being a fireman is more important than being a detective. So you don't need to know exactly what the emotional trigger is, and you don't need to know the story from your past. It's an interesting conversation, but you don't need to know that. What you need to do is not so much figure out why you overeat, but figure out how to stop. Some very practical things about how to stop.
Okay.
And you do that with focus and clarity, rules as opposed to guidelines that help you to become a different person. So for example, in our culture, most people say if you're struggling with chocolate, then just try to avoid chocolate 90% of the time. What I say instead is you want to make a rule that says, I will never eat chocolate during a weekday again. And there's a big difference between those two statements, because if you say, I will never eat chocolate during the week again, all of your chocolate decisions have been made. If you say, I will avoid chocolate 90% of the time, then every time you're in front of a chocolate bar, you have to make another food decision. That's a very critical difference, because it turns out that willpower is a very fatigable muscle. Willpower is drained, kind of like gas in the tank. It's not an on and off switch that some people have and some people don't. It's more like gas in your tank. And it's drained every time you have to make a decision. Not only food decisions, by the way, but every time you make a decision about what to do with an email, whether or not your kid can have that Nintendo station. Or I guess that's the wrong station now. Probably some other brand. I'm getting old. But you know what I mean? Like every decision you have to make over the course of the day will wear your willpower down, especially food decisions.
So does willpower even work?
In certain situations, willpower works, but it doesn't work repeatedly. What character trumps willpower? So I'll give you an example. Diane, suppose you go into a diner and you sit down at the table and there's a $20 bill on the table. And the waitress hasn't seen it yet. It's her tip from the last customer. And the waitress says, I'll be right back. I'm just going to get you a menu. And there's nobody else at the table. And there are no people up front. There are no video cameras. There's no window. Nobody could see you if you took the $20 bill, and the waitress wouldn't even know. Do you take that 20?
I wouldn't take it.
How come?
It's not mine.
And why is that important? Because you're not a thief.
Right. I'm not a thief. And today, if I walked in there, I would definitely give it to the nurse, because I have no attachment to that money. I don't need it. You know what I mean? I don't need it.
Yeah. So as a matter of character, without even having thought this through, you've decided you're not the kind of person who would take someone else's money. You're not a thief.
Right.
Even though it would benefit you personally, even though nobody would know.
Right.
You're not going to get away with that, and it doesn't require willpower, because you've decided about the kind of person you're going to be.
But I know I took it. See, that's the whole thing.
You would know, and you're not that kind of person.
Right.
It would be inconsistent with your identity.
Exactly.
That's how you beat emotional eating. You create statements of character. I will never eat chocolate during the week again. Then what you're really saying is I'm not the kind of person who eats chocolate during the week, right? Or I always go to the gym 5 days per calendar week, no matter what. I'm the kind of person who goes to the gym 5 days per calendar week. Or sometimes that's too strong for people in the beginning. They could say, I'm becoming the kind of person who doesn't eat chocolate during the week, or I'm becoming the kind of person who always goes to the gym 5 days per calendar week.
It sounds like what you tell yourself is very important, because when you said, I'm the kind of person that goes to the gym 5 days a week, I remember being that person who went to the gym 5 days a week because I had no control over my food, but it put a lot of stress on me to be in that mindset. So I love the language you chose when you said, I'm becoming that person. That felt lighter.
It's softer.
Yes.
It's a softer way to go about it.
Yes.
And so you ask people, could you give up chocolate during the week? And a lot of them will say no. They'll say, well, could you become the kind of person who doesn't eat chocolate during the week? And they'll say yes. It's a very, very interesting shift, because without knowing it, we're acculturated to develop character unconsciously. We're acculturated to remake ourselves and become people who we aren't. That's what vision boards are about. That's what the law of attraction is really about. It's like, what kind of person do I want to become? And it turns out that if you become a fireman by making these kind of character statements and you stop the emotional eating behavior, it turns out that when you do that, then the emotions are much more accessible. And those soulful conversations to figure out why you were eating in the first place become more valuable. And you can make a lot more progress in psychotherapy or meditation or any type of soulful spiritual pursuit that you go after when you use some very practical techniques like that to stop the overeating. Does that make sense?
Oh my goodness. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
That is so awesome. I mean, to hear how you you make it simpler, actually, in those terms. Yeah.
Trying to help 1 million people a year to stop binge eating.
Wow.
The other element of emotional eating that is very surprising to people is the idea that that the negative voice that you hear after you make a mistake, the part of you that says, you're pathetic, I can't believe you did it again, you're never going to get this, you're always going to be a fat person, just give up and be a happy fat person. That voice is actually binge motivated, and it's very difficult to continue binging if you refuse to yell at yourself. See, the purpose of that voice is to weaken your sense of strength and character so that you're not able to resist the next binge. And I actually find that it's helpful to separate your human identity, by which I mean everything you think of as you, all of the goals and aspirations and all the people that you love and relationships you want to cherish and your self-concept and your spirituality and your creativity and your goals and dreams. That's all you. Versus that voice that says you have to binge, you have to eat this thing you shouldn't be eating. I find it very helpful to separate those and think of the binge voice as your lizard brain. I actually call it my inner pig. You don't have to do that. A lot of people don't like that. But I called it my inner pig. I would make very clear lines in the sand, I'll always put my fork down between bites, or I'll never have seconds without taking a 5-minute walk around the block or something like that. Make very, very clear lines in the sand. And then if I heard a voice telling me to do anything other than follow those rules, I knew that that was my lizard brain or my pig. And I would say, well, that's just the pig. The pig wants it. I don't. The pig is squealing. I don't listen to farm animals tell me what to do. That chocolate on a Wednesday right now, that's pig slop for me. And, too bad, pig, you can't have it. It's a very, very simple cognitive technique, which isolates the lizard brain from your human identity. It separates your constructive versus your destructive thoughts. And now all of a sudden, it doesn't matter what emotion you experience. And by the way, I've got a lot of compassion for the emotional stress people go through. I mean, Diane, if you want a hug, I'll give you a hug. Like I'm not a cold guy.
But, thank you.
But just so you know. But I do find that this very cold, practical, crude technique for separating yourself from the lizard brain is important because it's very difficult to love yourself out of an addiction. What happens is because the addiction targets the lizard brain, and neurologically, all that the lizard brain really evolved to do was to eat, mate, or kill. It's when the lizard brain sees something in the environment, it says, do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? It doesn't say, well, how is this going to affect my loved ones? How is this going to affect my tribe? What's this going to do for my long-term goals and aspirations? This is a very early part of our evolution, hundreds of millions of years ago, when eat, mate, or kill was the best we could do. It's the mammalian brain that started to care for relationships with others, and it's the neocortex and the logical brain that started to allow us to delay gratifications and stick to a diet and pursue long-term plans and goals. And what happens is if you're trying to love yourself thin at the moment of impulse, is really you're extending love to the lizard brain. And the lizard brain will run right through that for most people. For a lot of people who really get stuck with overeating, overcoming emotional eating is more like capturing and caging a rabid animal than loving yourself back to health. Loving your inner wounded child is something I advise, but separate and apart from capturing and caging that animal. Another way to think about it, if you don't like the be a fireman, not a detective analogy, or be a fireman, not a psychologist analogy, another way to think of it is that there's the fire and then there's the fireplace. And if you have a well-built enough fireplace, you can have a raging fire that doesn't get out of control. It doesn't burn anything down. It just kind of keeps you warm. If you have enough clarity in the rules that you want to follow in the way that you eat, if you take the time to make a list of your trouble foods and trouble food behaviors, and you decide what kind of person you want to be from here forward with regards to those trouble foods and trouble food behaviors, then what you're really doing is building a stronger fireplace. And that fireplace is called character. And you could have the most raging anger. You could be suicidally depressed. You could be anxious beyond belief where you feel like your heart is coming out of your chest. You could be exuberant. You could be unbelievably lonely and depressed. It doesn't matter how emotional you feel or how stressed you are. That fire can rage inside the fireplace if the fireplace is well constructed, and it won't get out. And I find that on a practical basis, it's more important to prioritize that type of approach, building the fireplace, than putting out the fire. Once the fireplace is built, then we can manage the fire. Then that's an important thing to do. And like I said, I'm glad that I had those conversations with my mom. I love talking about the psychology of food. I love the sessions where people want to tell me about, gee, they had bagels and lox at their mother's table when they were, 5 years old, and they have all these memories, and that we can talk about how to capture those feelings, those positive feelings that they're looking for without reigniting the addictions. We can do it without bagels, but I just have discovered for myself and for many other people, and we've got thousands of people that over 300,000 people read the book so far. It's just working better to prioritize that, and then go spend the years working on your emotional self, and that's fine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really makes sense. I had a question when you were talking about the lizard brain, and we'll go back a little bit, and the inner pig. Where does the messaging from the environment come in that drives us to eat? Where does that come in? How does the inner pig handle that kind of messaging from the environment?
The advertising world spends billions of dollars to create packaging that looks healthy even though it necessarily isn't. I remember working with a VP of marketing at a very major food bar manufacturer that I would get sued if I mentioned, who told me that their key profitable insight was to take the vitamins out of the bar and put the money into the packaging instead to make it look healthy. And it's perfectly legal. And, for example, vibrant colors, a diversity of vibrant colors on a package, in nature, a diversity of vibrant colors would signal an availability of a diversity of nutrients. If you create a salad with a diversity of colors, you're going to be more well-nourished than if you have a salad with, one vibrant color, although one vibrant color can be really good for you too. And so that's the type of thing that the food industry knows, that the advertising industry knows, will trick your lizard brain into making a biological error and eating and believing that it needs their stuff to survive as opposed to fruits or vegetables or lean proteins or the things that nature really made available for us. So there is this subversion of the lizard brain responding to the messaging by the advertising industry. There are 5,000 to 7,000 food messages pumped at us every year via the airwaves and the internet. Virtually none of them are about eating whole, fresh, ripe, raw fruits and vegetables, right? Right. So we are constantly being programmed to make these biological errors, to think that this is where the satisfaction and life nourishment will come from. And then the advertising industry associates that with celebrations of life and comfort. So you will see families eating it together. You will see, a beautiful woman smiling and talking about how wonderful it is. You will see a lot of, touching or hugging and kissing. There will be music that excites the nervous system. And so they're using a lot of like operant and classical conditioning to attach your neurological belief system to say, this is where the love is. You should look for love at the bottom of that bag of potato chips. You should look for love at the inside of a chocolate bar wrapper.
Exactly. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
So that adds a level of complexity, right?
It does add a level of complexity if you do what everybody does and just walk around blind to it. See, most people believe that advertising doesn't impact them. Now, here's what the advertising industry knows that you don't. Advertising impacts you more when you believe it doesn't impact you, because your sales resistance is down. Advertising is designed to make you believe that it's irrelevant to you, because then your sales resistance will be down. So most of this can be fought by just waking up and doing the thinking necessary to make your decisions about your trouble foods beforehand with simple rules and character statements like we talked about before.
Right. Waking up and turning some of that input off.
You can turn the input off, but what's interesting is you will find, like, there's no reason you have to watch TV all day long. There's no reason you have to watch those commercials, and there's no reason you have to open your mind to, being a robot for the fat cats in white suits with mustaches that are laughing all the way to the bank while you buy their stuff and make yourself miserable with it. There's no reason you have to do that. However, there's a whole other side of the equation, which really comes from the addiction treatment industry, that tells us that we are powerless over our own bodies, that we can't resist even if we wanted to, that the best we could do is abstain one day at a time, that it's no use trying to quit, nobody can quit, that you need these, meetings and extensive treatments to do it. But the evidence doesn't really support that.
But that's real. I mean, I'm around many people that say those very words all the time. They have in their minds, they have no control. It's hard. I can't, those are the words you hear, not the ability to take responsibility. That is so real.
See, the reason that's caught on so well, and the whole idea that it's a disease, that we can't control ourselves and we're powerless and we have these irresistible impulses, it's because of the level of shame that people feel. If you look at anyone who used to be obese, including me, no matter how long they've been thin, you could still see the shame on their face. Like the memories of eating out of the garbage can and stealing my roommate's food and driving to 7 different fast food places so that no one person would know how much I was eating, and, spending a week with my phone off and, just having to recover from all that crap that I ate. Those memories are just underneath the surface, and we all have this shame.
So how do you deal with that shame?
Well, the first thing is to remember that it's binge motivated.
Okay.
Let's talk about other mistakes you make in life. If you touch a hot stove, you're not supposed to say, "Oh my God, I'm pathetic. I'm a compulsive hot stove toucher. I might as well just put both hands on it right now because it's going to happen again." You're supposed to feel the pain for the moment. See, there is a healthy function of pain in our lives. Life is not supposed to be a completely pain-free experience. You're supposed to feel pain at times to draw your attention to places where you made a mistake so you don't touch the hot stove again. But if you perseverate on that pain, if you exaggerate that pain, if you talk about how pathetic you are, the point of that is to wear you down so that you feel like you're incapable of resisting the next binge.
Versus walking through that pain, letting it come up, and just sitting with it.
And what that means very specifically with food mistakes is that you feel a little bit of shame, a little bit of guilt.
Yep.
More guilt than shame. Shame is more about who you are, and guilt is more about what you did. But just a little bit of guilt, a little bit of shame. Pay attention. Ask yourself, well, do I need another food rule to make sure I don't do that again? What do I want to do in the future? Did I take good enough care of myself before the binge? Most people were not taking care of their authentic food and psychological needs before the binge, and that's why the binge was appealing to them. Make your adjustments. Get up and aim at the bullseye again. If you keep getting up and aiming at the bullseye, you're going to get to be a better aimer. That's how you become an archer. If you miss the target and say, "Screw it, I'm just shooting the rest of the arrows into the audience," then that's not going to lead anywhere. And that's why most people have ongoing trouble.
Okay.
But the 12-step methodology suggests that we don't have the power, that we're helpless and powerless, and we have a disease. And that immediately relieves the sense of shame that people have, but at the tremendous cost of abdicating your free will and responsibility. And if you abdicate your free will and responsibility, you've abdicated your power, and you walk through life feeling terrified that these foods are going to get you. Like, you have to be frightened of your own body. You don't have to be frightened of your own body. You don't have to be frightened of the advertising industry. You don't have to be frightened of big food. You just have to put in the work for a short period of time, maybe a couple of months, to articulate exactly what healthy food and unhealthy food are for you, to practice listening to your constructive versus your destructive thoughts about food, and to become the kind of person who chooses the healthy option. That's what you need to do, and you can walk away from emotional eating. You can walk away from compulsive eating. It's like people are drowning in 6 inches of mud, and it's such an uncomfortable experience. And it takes a little while to, if you stand up and walk away, it takes a little while to clean yourself off and feel better. But you do not have to sacrifice your entire life to this. You can reclaim your power, and you don't have to define yourself as an emotional eater. You really don't.
So how can people learn more?
Well, I've got a bunch of things that are free. If you go to neverbingeagain.com and you click the big red button, sign up for the reader bonuses, you will get a free copy of the book in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. We do have hard copies available, and it is available on Audible. There is a fee for that. The other thing I'll give you are free sets of food plan starter templates. So if you are trying to follow paleo or vegan or high carb or low carb or point counting or calorie counting, whatever you're trying to follow, we probably have a starter template that will show you some simple rules that might work for you. We want you to own them yourself, so we call them starter templates. You have to modify them, but we have that over there. And the last thing is that I recorded a whole bunch of coaching sessions, which I also distribute for free, so that you can hear what a compassionate way of life this actually is. It sounds very harsh, when this, crazy psychologist gets on and says, "Well, I've got this pig inside me, and I don't eat pig slop, and I don't let pigs tell me what to do." sounds really harsh, but it's actually it's primitive, but it's a very compassionate way to go about life. And if you hear me coach people, you'll be very surprised at how fast their sense of confidence and hope and enthusiasm is restored, and how compassionate this really is. So it's all at neverbingeagain.com, and click for big red button, sign up for the free bonuses, and we'll get that all to you.
Dr. Glenn, I want to thank you for being here and giving us so many tools, your expert advice, as well as all the free information that we can get from your website. I think these tools will be very, very important to help us not only bring awareness, but make some life changes for the better in our lives.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for being here. It's been an awesome topic.
Thank you for having me on anytime, and you've got to come into my podcast next.
I will. And if you found something of value from this episode of Balanced Living for Busy Professionals, I want you to share it with someone. Let us know the topics you would like to hear more about. Leave your comments right in the show notes of this episode. Your feedback helps us to bring the best health and wellness conversations and topics that will support you in your busy life. And this topic is an example of how you can be supported. Thank you for listening. Get my new book, Jumpstart Your Life, Find Your Motivation, and Change Your Life One Step at a Time. This book has been released on Amazon.com and other online retailers. This book was inspired by my successful and life-changing workshops that I've been leading for over 10 years. I am now bringing my tools, techniques, and accountability structures straight to you. So if you're ready to take that first step towards the life you've always wanted, get the book and discover your capacity for success and attain your goals through a series of simple, powerful techniques. I also want you to join my private Facebook community called Jumpstart Your Life. Get resources, tips, as well as ideas as you integrate the Jumpstart Your Life process. I'll see you in the community.
Thank you for listening to Balanced Living for Busy Professionals. This podcast is sponsored by DianeRandallConsults.com. If you like this show, the best way to support it is by leaving 5-star feedback on iTunes. And please, feel free to email your questions, comments, and suggestions to feedback@DianeRandallConsults.com. Until next week, namaste.